Well, maybe one way of beginning to cut through, get people to listen to you again, is to demonstrate that you've understood what they've said. Prime Minister on Friday morning said this, and it was very interesting. He said he had made mistakes, he himself.
Yeah.
What was his biggest mistake?
We've had a few. I think the one that I feel caused us real damage early on, I suppose two things, and they are connected. Firstly, the decision we made around the winter fuel allowance, right to target it on those who need it most, but we went too far, and that caused us huge, huge problems. I think alongside that, I think we were too gloomy and too negative early on. People knew the country was in a mess. They didn't need us to remind them in such detail that the country was in a mess. And whilst it's right that we pin all of those problems on 14 years of Tory government, people voted for change for a reason. They didn't want to hear about that. They wanted us to focus on what we as a government were going to deliver. So, and I think those two things are linked. But I do think that those early mistakes embedded a sense of gloom when actually we have a unique opportunity to deliver a better future for our country, and we still have that opportunity. We've got time on our side. That doesn't take away from the hurt that people are feeling at the moment, and I feel it.
But
let's think about what we can achieve together.
Can I just say, you've been admirably clear about the mistakes, winter fuel allowance, that you were too gloomy. You and your colleagues were coming in here every week saying how terrible everything was. I think that's very clear. One thing that struck me was that the Prime Minister, when he said this, he said, we were right to level with the public about the scale and depth of the challenges we face. We were right to be gloomy, basically. And he said we didn't do enough to convince them that things will get better. There's something about the way he put that made me think of people in interviews who say, that when they're asked what their biggest weakness is, they say, I was just too perfect. He says, my mistake was that we were just too honest. Why couldn't he just have said what you've just said?
Well, I think he was. I think that's what he was.
I think that's what he was getting at. Saying what you've just said.
I think that's.
And he doesn't say it.
I think that's what he was. The Prime Minister was getting at, which is, it was right that we levelled with the British people about the scale of the challenge. But to the conversation I had with the lady on the doors in Sunderland, she then said, "That's fine, I get that, but what are you doing about it?"
Isn't that part of your problem, that he communicates in this way that doesn't say things in a way that you, literally, in the last 3 minutes, have said? You were clear. Winter fuel allowance, big mistake. We were too miserable. He goes, we were too honest. Isn't that your problem?
I don't think that's quite what he was saying, but what I would say is that Keir is someone who I am proud is leading our country through a very unstable world with all of the volatility and the challenges that we face. He recognises, as we all do, that we need to deliver what we promised to people in 2024, and that right now, what we're doing, we're not making that argument as well as we should. He knows that, and I know that.
Now, this is the moment he rightly says that nothing is going to change, and as I stated, Trevor can see through this BS pretty damn clearly.
I'm not going to resign on that. The point is, the Prime Minister's been saying for the last 3 days, I hear you, I get it, we are going to change. I've now asked you about the three of the biggest issues facing the government, and what I'm getting is nothing's going to change.
Look, the wrong message to take from the elections that we've just had would be that people want us to change tack.
I want to know whether when the Prime Minister says he's going to change, what is going to change? Nothing on the big policies is going to change.
Look, part of the frustration that people feel about the state of our country is a failure of government to have a system that works for them. That is what has to change. And a part of that is around immigration. Look,
so what does that mean?
Hang on.
Well, what does it mean? No, you're giving me a lot of words, but what does it mean?
Right, I have always believed that you have to have a system, a fair system, one that recognises the benefits but has clear controls alongside it. That is the system that we are going to deliver. That is not the system that we have at the moment. That's part of the reason that people feel government isn't working for them. It's part of the answer. It's not part of the problem.
Nobody's going to argue it would be good if government worked. You're just not telling me how you're going to make it work.
I just...
As you can see, it just sees through the BS because it's the same shite you hear every single week from Labour MPs. Now, this same MP was, of course, on Camilla's show this morning as well, and she grilled her even further.
The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, joins me now in the GB News studio. Lovely to see you this morning. The Prime Minister has given an interview to The Observer in which he has declared that he is still going to be Prime Minister by the time of the next general election. Is he completely deluded?
No, and I totally understand how, particularly colleagues at the moment are feeling. We had a really devastating set of election results. We got a real kicking, and there's no hiding from that. The Prime Minister is upfront about that. He takes responsibility for those results, as do we all. This is not just about one individual. This is about, our failure to tell the story of the change that we're bringing, that people voted for in 2024. And, there is a big job of work ahead of us.
But can I just say, look, you've got the broadcast round today. I have huge respect for you because you always do GB News. Your colleagues sometimes don't. You insist on coming into the studio. You're very much kind of Labour through and through. You're a working class girl done good. You're brought up by a single mother on a council estate up north and went to Oxford, and now you're where you are. You cannot possibly be aligning yourself with this degree of failure. You've been wiped out in Labour heartlands north of the Midlands. Why are you clinging on to this guy who has made a series of catastrophic errors, U-turn after U-turn, support for Peter Mandelson? He's digging in. This must go completely against your political instincts.
I mean, I'm in no doubt about the scale of the challenge ahead of us. We had a really devastating set of results in Sunderland. We lost some really good people who'd served their community for many years and had made an enormous difference, and they lost out because of the national position. And that is a responsibility on all of us. It's a responsibility that I share. I'm in government. I'm a member of the Cabinet. And I take responsibility for that as well as the Prime Minister. And I think the message that I heard from voters is that, they voted for change in 2024. And there's a real sense of disappointment amongst voters that they don't feel that change has materialised in the way that they wanted. Now, that takes different forms. A lot of that concern is around things like social housing, about crime, about getting more police on the streets, about the fact that waiting lists in the NHS haven't come down as fast as we would like. Alongside that, we are doing some fantastic things in government that I am really proud of, but we don't get to be heard on those things unless we level with people about where we are at the moment. And, this is a 5-year parliamentary term. We're not even 2 years in, and we do have the chance to turn it around. But that is on us to do that, and I'm not going to hide from it.